Yeah, we'll all move forward. Yeah. No, she has.
Are we ready? Okay, I'm going to start the meeting. Welcome all to the June meeting of the Solid Waste Advisory Committee. Thanks for all the members attending both live and online, and for interested members of the public here. First item on the agenda is review and approval of the May meeting minutes. Oh, wait, so you better do roll call first. I'm sorry. Paul Bertagna. Jared Black. Jared is here. Luke Dines. Ed Fitch or John Roberts, City of Redmond. Keith Caceres. Cassie Lacey or Robin Jones, City of Bend.
Robin Jones.
Thank you, Robin.
Mhm.
Erica Lindberg or Ron Shearer for Republic Services. Chris Ogren.
Here.
Mike Riley.
Here.
Aaron Swetnam.
Present.
And Robin Vora.
Here.
Okay, we have 6 members in attendance, so we do have a quorum. Thank you all. A review and approval of the May meeting minutes. Do we have any comments on the minutes? Boy, Robin, I think this is the first time you haven't had something to say. You must have done a good job.
He didn't review them yet.
Okay, so it appears we have no comments on the meeting minutes, so it moved to accept the meeting minutes as published.
I'll make the motion.
Okay, Chris Oberman motions. Do we have a second?
Second.
Or we'll beat you to it, sorry. Or 1 second. Any discussion? Okay, minutes approved. Next item on the agenda is public comment. So this is my last meeting, and so hopefully Tim is much more versed with Robert's Rule of Order than I am. So all in favor of approving the meeting minutes as published?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. Thank you. I mess up those every single meeting. So next item on the agenda is public comment. At the last meeting we had some serious problems with the audio recording, so it was a challenge to try to track the meeting minutes off the recording. So if anyone has any comments, we want you to come up and sit at the table here and make sure you clearly state your name, and then you'll get your time. So do we have anyone that signed up to speak? Okay, does anybody in the audience want to speak or do any comments? Okay, we have no comments from the public. So the next item on the agenda is the Bureau of Land Management site consideration update. So we did meet with the Bureau of Land Management and representatives. Erica Lindberg is here. We did meet with the Bureau of Land Management and representatives from Congressman Chavez DeRemer's office and had a discussion about the process. Their Chavez DeRemer's office has taken up the lead for developing a congressional process to go through for approving a BLM site if we're going to take that track. We did discuss with them the timeline for that, similar to what Commissioner Chang had suggested early on, that if everything lines up properly, it would take about a year to get through that process with them. But there's a lot of unknowns in how that's actually going to work. We don't want to move forward with the process until we're sure we have a viable site. It'd be a little bit unfortunate if we were to move forward with a process with the site and then find out we have a fatal flaw or some other challenge with the site and have to tell the congressional staff to never mind on that. So when we discussed with BLM and Chavez Dreamer's office that we would give ourselves about 3 months to do some level of evaluation on the two candidate sites. Again, the site on Powell Butte Highway and off of Stuckey Road, off Highway 20 between Bend and Milliken. So we're going to talk a little bit about the phase 2 process with Parametrics. We'll be awarding an agreement with Parametrics, hopefully for phase 2, and we'll add some additional scope of work for doing some level of assessment on the 2 BLM candidate sites before we move forward with anything with the congressional offices on this. So that's kind of the process in a nutshell at the moment here. We'll be doing some a little bit more in-depth evaluation of the 2 sites in the coming months here once we get formally get Parametrics on board for the next phase of the project here. Yeah, but
Look,
make sure we're picking up Robin there. Yeah, thank you.
can you hear me there?
Got to make that green, I think.
Oh,
I think it's working with it.
okay. So have you had a chance to do any further work on the 2 sites?
Other than doing site visits, no. Parametrics technically does not have anything in the scope of service for doing that. They've been assisting us on a very preliminary level. You know, we spoke when we spoke with BLM about the 2 sites. You know, they brought up some of the issues. The Powell Butte Highway site has, I think, 3 grazing leases on it. The Stuckey Road site has 1 grazing lease, and there was not an active grazing operation on Stuckey at the time. They had mentioned the gas pipeline, but that's very far west of the site. I mean, the gas pipeline that you're talking about is right at the entrance road to Knott landfill, so we're accustomed to working near those. But that the gas pipeline is quite a ways away from the Powell Butte Highway site.
There's a power line there too, isn't there? Or maybe it's just north.
There's no utilities that impact either of the 2 locations that we have identified. There are residences on the Crook County side of the county line that are not too far out there. So that may or may not be a challenge. And, you know, we'll be going into those details, looking at those issues when we actually get Parametrics on board to start looking at those.
Would this be a good time to just offer a couple of brief comments on that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So at least I've talked to some people, I guess, who have more of an ecological wildlife background on those 2 sites that are familiar with them. And I also went on briefly and looked at them very briefly. I think both are, from my perspective, preferable to Roth East. And, one question first. For sure, the Highway 97 site is out.
Yes. Yeah. With the Redmond acquiring additional land for long-term development, I mean, they're looking down the road 50 years or more. They're looking at parallel runways and things. So that pushes the boundary. It basically takes that entire overlap between the Bend and Redmond airports out of contention completely. Yeah.
All right. It looks like they're both, I didn't measure it on this map, but they're both about the same distance from, say, 27th and Greenwood.
Roughly, I would say, yeah.
Yeah, okay. The Powell Butte site, from an ecological environmental standpoint, would be preferable, for what I could see.
Yeah, one thing, and I'm not sure what the implications of this are, and I don't know whether Dwight could shed light on it, was that is an antelope range.
Yeah, it's zoned that way.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a whole lot of antelope out there, but I could be wrong. It's just at the edge of the zoning. It's more degraded. It's been more heavily grazed from what little I saw.
Yeah, they were, like I said, they were when Tim and I went out to take a look, the gates are all locked there, so there's an active grazing.
Yeah, there's a
being
sign
done
there
right
too.
now,
Yeah. There's private land in there. I don't know if that complicates things or if it's better or worse. I don't know.
Yeah, so there's 2 private properties. If you look at the map. Yeah, so it's the one on the right. You can see that kind of L-shaped white area to the south of the property. Those are 2 private parcels. There, one owner lives in Louisiana, and the other one is here in Bend. And we haven't reached out to them on anything. It's not contingent on acquiring those 2 sites. as landlocked as they are around BLM land, they probably can't do too much with the property anyway. And there may or may not be some interest in selling. We might entertain acquiring it, but if you look at the airport zoning, it kind of takes one parcel almost out completely and a good portion of the second one. But our plans are not contingent on acquiring the properties.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then let's see, on that one, yeah, I guess the other one is, I actually walked on a trail. There's a road going off the old highway.
Yeah, Stooky Road. Yeah.
Is that dirt road going,
Yeah.
goes that turn around and then the ATVs go up and down there. Yeah, I actually walked on the left side of the wrong side. The landfill, if there would be on what would be the right or it is the west side.
On the west side, yes. Dookie Road is roughly the east boundary. If you notice, Robin, there was a 3-strand fence to the west, to the
Yeah,
east
right.
here. I think that's the boundary between the different BLM parcels, but everything we would be exploring
Oh,
would be
that's
to the west of
Yeah,
that fence line.
I didn't look closely on the west side. The east side anyways, are in pretty good shape ecologically. In fact, if you go out there right now, I'd recommend it. The wildflowers are incredible.
Yeah.
But if that, I don't know if the west side is different for some reason. I assume it's the same. It's very much like the Badlands.
Yeah.
In terms of ecological condition. You would see it maybe from the very edge of Horse Ridge. It's, further away than Roth East from sage grouse, but avian predators would still, fly in there, still connected in that area.
I will, I'm not sure where along that east boundary, with that parcel we identified avoids all 3 levels of sage grouse zoning. So it is adjacent, at least some portion of that property is adjacent to, I want to say zone general habitat is the lowest level of the 3, I believe. Yeah, so there is a portion of that.
Predators more likely there than the Powell Butte site in terms of any effect on sage grouse. And at least the people I talked to, my own feeling was that if you had to choose between the two from just a wildlife environment perspective, you would take the Powell Butte site. The other one is, it's nice shape, at least what I saw. I'd be a real shame to have that all dug up. But anyway,
Yeah, so the process, once we get paramedics on board on this, they'll be essentially doing a kind of a quick phase 1 assessment like we did to go from the 31 sites down to the 2, but also get some geophysical work done out there. We need to understand what the soil conditions are. That's kind of one of the critical things out there.
there's also on the old highway, there's an old gravel pit.
Yeah, those were actually in the running back in the early 90s when the county was looking for a alternate site when not dump was going to close. And we took a look at those. They're just they're too small and the configuration is not good. You got to be able to manage all that, all that runoff that's coming off of the northerly Horse Ridge formation there too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not big enough. And
Correct.
it's private. I don't know if ODOT owns.
Yeah, no, it's Knife River owns one and Robinson owns the other. Yeah, there's 2 different mining operations out there.
Anyway, that was my perception.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you.
I have a thought about the congressional district. Is that all in the Reamers or is that in Ben's out there?
One's in Ben's and one's in Chavez de Reamers. Tim?
Yeah, so the one off of Stooky Road and Horse Ridge is Ben's and Ben's and the Powell Butte is Chavez.
Yeah, that question came up in our meeting with
Yeah.
Chavez de Reamers office there. Yeah. The process will be supported by all the local representatives and have to go through the process through Washington DC. So, I think the key thing at this stage is we have one office that's willing to take up the task here. Any other questions? Okay, we'll move on to phase 2 screening update. Before Dwight takes over, I just want to explain the process we're going through. So we had retained parametrics for the phase 1 site assessment. And so that agreement was to do the work they've done to date. It would be far too speculative to include what phase 2 is going to evolve in that scope of work for awarding the initial contract. So the process we had recognized at the start was we would retain them for phase 1 and then step into phase 2. And what we're going through administratively is what's called a sole source procurement. We're not going through a public procurement process with an RFP. And we'll be going before the board next week to present our findings and position on that. We did a public advertisement to notice that we are doing a sole source procurement and had no protests from any firms here. So we're kind of on that track, hopefully to get parametrics on board for phase 2 next week. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Dwight here to talk about what phase 2 is going to involve.
So what we have here, and unfortunately it doesn't work well for you, but on the screens back here, we have the siting process phase 2. We shared this actually at last month's meeting. The one thing I just really wanted to do here is highlight some of the items that are real differentiators potentially between sites. And so what this primarily is, you know, the master plan kind of for this site, as well as the capital and operating costs. That could be a major differential between different sites, depending on, you know, what you have to do for excavation, what you have to do for soils, for operations, the distance of the site from the waste centroid, as we call it. Those are major differentiators in the cost side. And this is what we talked about a lot in the last year through this process where, okay, well, what's it going to cost difference, you know? And so this is really where we're able to get into the details of that. Looking at, you know, now that we're down to 2 sites, really looking at specifics of what it would mean to develop a facility on each of these sites. So then the next one is site development and permitting assessment. So, you know, what is it going to take as far as land use, either rezone or conditional use permitting or other types of permitting, land use permitting for these sites. The solid waste permitting as well. Solid waste permitting probably isn't going to be that much different for the 2 sites, but the land use permitting could be. And so that's particularly what we're looking at here. And this is where, you know, we've discussed in the past regarding the resource lands, the mining resource lands, surface mining resource lands, and being able to develop a landfill on those lands as part of reclamation. And so that's kind of what's being looked at in particular with the land use for Moon Pit. A couple other items that I've highlighted here. So the geology, hydrogeology assessment and the geotechnical investigation. So this is really, okay, well, where's our groundwater? Does our groundwater look like at these 2 sites? And essentially, there's a lot of information available for Moon Pit. Obviously not as much available for a non-active site like Roth East. And so it's to do more work on determining, you know, what the geology is, what the groundwater is at these sites, as well as the geotechnical aspects, you know, as far as both the use of the materials as well as its ability to you know, develop a landfill on those. Thing to remember about landfills is that you're putting a lot of weight in a location. And so, you know, you have to make sure that your geology can handle that additional weight on it, you know, from a subsidence. And that's one of the requirements under the federal permitting is subsidence and foundation conditions at the site. So those are some of the things that we look at on the geotechnical side. And then the 2 others that we see as major differentials, you know, in looking at them is the natural resources assessment. As Robin brought up, you know, that's a particular issue on any site, and, you know, how do the different overlays work on these sites? At this point, we're able to actually go out there and do site assessments of the natural resources, wildlife, fauna and flora, and at these sites. Also archaeological and cultural resources, to do some pedestrian walkovers of these sites to determine, as well as further investigation of possible studies that have already been done. Studies have been done at the Moon Pit site. They haven't been done at Roth East. And so getting that kind of up to the same level of understanding. So those are kind of the ones that we see as a big differential. We're doing all the rest of these, but they're not going to really probably decide between the two sites so much as these ones that are highlighted. And so as Chad noted, as soon as we get notice to proceed, we will be out there and we will be starting to do some of this field work, which includes doing some amount of drilling as well as geophysical investigation at these sites. That's where you go out and you use different acoustics to determine the depth to rock and different types of geologic formations that are out there. And then back on to the other two BLM sites, evaluating those, as Chad noted, that's very similar to what we did to bring the two sites we are investigating up to that point. So it's kind of doing that focus site evaluation of those two sites. So we kind of do that same level of desktop evaluation on the two additional BLM sites if those are moving forward.
In 3 months, this committee or county commissioners will pick one of the two BLM sites possibly.
So what we approached BLM and Chavez DeReamer's office with is that we will give ourselves 3 months to look at those two sites, and if we get a viable site, a preferable site, and this will be run through the Solid Waste Advisory Committee at that stage, that we'll move forward with that.
And that'll be factored into the phase 2.
It'll roll into phase 2 as well. Yes. Yeah. We just don't have enough information. Again, we didn't want to have the congressional process proceed and all of a sudden find out neither side's viable and have to call and tell them, oh, never mind. Thanks. Oh, thanks. Yeah. So we wanted to avoid that potential there. So we need to give ourselves a little more time to look at them.
This is an aside, but on the BLM site, the one on Highway 20, if that pit is there and you need more dirt for some reason, can you go over there and get it from that pit?
I'm not sure if those sites are actively mining. I know Robinson has been bringing stumps and things like that from land clearing projects. Those don't require a DEQ permit, so I know they've been bringing that kind of material out there off and on. When we looked at the site, there was nothing active out there.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen anything active out there for a long time. Yeah. No, that's definitely a potential idea. I mean, I think I've made it clear before, soil is lifeblood of the landfill operation. So we want to make sure wherever site we're going to have that. That is kind of convenient. That's a possibility, because importing waste from it or soil, this could get cost prohibitive. That's right down the road with the one.
Yeah, that's a big piece of the first item on on our phase 2 scope, and that is evaluation of soils, on the sites. And so what can you do both as far as natural soils that are there, as well as processing materials on site that could be used for the different needs of the facility. So and that's a huge piece of the cost of a facility for sure. In fact, it is typically the largest cost is excavation and processing of materials for use.
And if you went with Moon Pit, they would just keep excavating and use that to cover. And
Something along those lines, and the fact that there is already a hole there, you've kind of got the natural, or not natural, but the depression there to work from.
Yeah, and that's one of the things in the phase 2 site assessment for Moon Pit. Particularly, we want to make sure that they have that soil. They were taking sand out of there for cement manufacturing. So one of the material we could potentially recover has been a resource for them. I will say on the side, we did meet with Moon Pit representatives last week to talk a little bit more about the issues of lease versus ownership. We're just still in preliminary discussions on how that might work if that site comes up. I like the idea, Robin, if there's material available at that Knife River and Robinson's operations there, it kind of depends on just what the status of the mining permits are as well.
that could be used on several of the sites.
It needs to be nearby. That transportation costs can get very, very expensive. Really.
At least Moon Pit, or if you went with Highway 20. it'd be nice to have I'd be interested in a field trip. But I'm only available. I'll be gone in July, be available July 2nd. For,
Yeah, you had asked about a field trip, to look at those two sites, and Tim and I did a drive out to them again, but you can't access the Valley Highway site right now, the gates are all on for grazing. And you take a little driver walk up Stupid Road yourself there. Yeah, I think I responded back, I think if we get a site that's viable, we'll definitely take the committee out, but at this early stage, I'm just not sure if it's a valid use of your time or ours, really.
it was easy to walk and go through. So, yeah.
Tim and I drove.
I mean, the Powell Butte side, the other one.
Oh, yeah.
Any other questions on the next workout there? So
I got a question. If you come up to the table, state your name and speak clearly into the mic, please. Thank you.
It's on the last slide. I didn't know if you were gonna have more highlighted ones. Steve Wright. I'm a landowner in Milliken by Pine Mountain. And you said that the highlighted areas will kind of be the emphasis on what decides between the sites. And one of the big difference, this has been brought up, but one of the big differences that between these two, it's not highlighted, is that the wind velocity and consistent wind velocity and high winds in the Milliken area are much higher than the Moon Pit area. And I've not only, hiked around both different areas at different times and noticed that, but also, I pay regular attention to the weather station out there at Milliken. I'm also a hang glider pilot. And so anyway, that to me, that should be a highlighted consideration as well, being the wind factor, the high wind factor in Milliken, because I would think that the trash is going to be blowing, on the highway, around that whole area. So, anyway, I just wanted to bring that up.
yeah, no, but appreciate that.
For the weather.
And it is definitely something that is part of what we're reviewing out there.
Excellent. Thank you.
Not a question, but just a statement. I would recommend
Would you wait, state your name?
Dr. Andrew Austin, Milliken landowner. I would suggest visiting the sites not during the afternoon, but early morning, evening. If you go out to the raw site, that's when you'll notice the high velocity.
I will say we had two different tours with the committees, with the committee members. I was out on the first tour and it was a nice calm day. Tim was out on a rather blustery day out there. And like Dwight said, the assessing the meteorological conditions is definitely gonna be part of the phase 2 work.
Mhm.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's actually a huge piece of any landfill operation, both from the standpoint of wind speed, wind direction, as well as precipitation, obviously, and type of precipitation.
I'll just make one comment. When I do site tours, one of the things I start my tours with is there's two unofficial criteria about landfill siting. Number one is they're always located where you have the best views, and that's been the case my entire career. And the second one, and I'm not making light of this, but they're also sited in the windiest part of the county. Wind is a challenge that virtually every landfill faces. We've had hurricane force winds and not landfill in my career here, and it's just something you have to deal with. So we're not strangers to it, and it's not something that's going to be minimized in this evaluation.
Go with the Powell Butte side. Would the town of Powell Butte or any of that area in Cook County be interested in somehow being a partner?
Well, Crook County does have their own solid waste operation there, and their collection service goes to that site. Again, these are not publicly accessible sites, so it's not like somebody that lives in Powell Butte can haul their waste
I mean,
over.
if Yeah, I guess it could be negotiations with Crook County if they wanted to have some of it come to the Palo View side.
I suppose that'd be the case, but with their own landfill, I'm not sure why they would do that. That would just raise the cost of their operations at
Yeah.
their own landfill. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I mean, we'd be definitely receptive to it, but I'm not sure how viable that actually would be for them.
So communications update, anything you want to?
Hi, everyone.
Susanna, gotta get on the mic.
Okay.
You,
Here, yeah. Hi, everyone. Susanna Jolver with Consor, and I don't have a lot to update folks on. As part of phase 2, we'll be doing more direct outreach with surrounding property owners and interest groups. So that will start now that we've narrowed to 2 sites. I don't think we'll be doing any of that as part of the BLM outreach, but we can discuss that. I don't know, or the BLM work that's going to be taking place on those 2 sites. So we have some boards set up in the back as part of a expanded meeting today. I don't know how many folks will get, but we're here till noon if folks want to hang around. And then we have another upcoming open house on September 11th. And that will be to share the results of the phase 2, some of the results of the phase work, not the full results. Yeah. Before the final site is selected by the commissioners next year. So
Although it's not part of the public outreach, we do have our meeting tomorrow with the regional solutions.
we do. Yeah. Yeah.
You want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, we're meeting with the Central Oregon Regional Solutions team tomorrow. So they're a group that has representatives from state agencies on it. So Water Resources, DEQ, DLCD, Department of Energy, ODOT, thinking about other ones, Business Oregon. So that'll be really good. They meet monthly and look at projects that have kind of a regional impact and try and help us kind of coordinate all the permits needed and things like that and give us a heads up on things kind of in advance of any land use or formal permitting. So that'll be good. Yeah.
When we were considering the Highway 97 side, the committee made a recommendation that we go out. Was it a mile for public outreach? Just to kind of get some feedback, should we do that with the other 2 BLM sites? There's hardly any owners.
It was a little bit of a premature outreach to do because we sent the letter out and a week and a half later, we sent another letter
Yeah.
telling them, never mind. And I was not really pleased with having to do that, when the information came up for the airport, it kind of put the kibosh on it. So I want to make sure before we start doing outreach, we're on pretty firm ground that these sites at least preliminarily have some viability to them.
So could we do that before September 11th?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
I would think when we're in this 3-month window, but when we get through some of the preliminary assessment work, we can make that determination whether the sites will have some traction or not.
You know now how many houses there are or wells within those 2 sites? It's hardly any, like 2.
Yeah, there's one residence, they're more than a mile out from
Yeah.
Stookie, from the Highway 20 site. The Palo Butte Highway site's a little bit more challenging. There are some residences in Crook County within a half mile, Tim. Yeah. And there's a handful of them, but there are some that are in some proximity to the Palo Butte Highway site.
So
Anything else?
one other thing
Yeah.
I was going to note is we had talked about having changing up the schedule for the SWAC meetings a little bit, just from the standpoint of not needing as many, during this kind of investigation phase. And so at least what we had discussed was August. So kind of preliminary results that we're getting out of the investigations, as well as maybe some preliminary understanding of the BLM sites. And then October, which would be kind of get feedback after the public meeting on the 11th of September. And, just kind of and where we're at as far as the further investigations. and then January, April, and May. So that's just to work out kind of as we're working on our pieces. And so I put those out there, and when we had discussed it, it was like, those are the meetings that would be really valuable for the siting effort. And if there are other meetings that are valuable for other purposes, that's something different. But for the siting effort, that's when we really wanted to get SWAC input, be able to present to you.
For this year, you'll be skipping the July, September, November, and December meeting.
Yes.
You find a structure on that.
So on the September 11th meeting, by then we won't have the results back on these two BLM sites in terms of the preliminary stuff that you're gonna do to just sort of assess viability. So does
Yeah,
it
we
make,
should be really close on those. And well, in fact, I would say for the September 11 meeting, we will have that information. Unless there's just something that's really out there that we haven't been able to work in, particularly if we end up doing some geophysical evaluation of those two sites, just to get a better feel for the geology. But otherwise, we will have done the desktop review of those sites by then. And I would say what we'll try to do is have that for the August meeting, this meeting in August. And that's why we really wanted to have an August meeting.
and that'll include the soils analysis, some kind of preliminary soils analysis, since that's a key part of the viability.
Yes, and that's kind of the one area that's will be a little gray at that point, possibly depending on what actual site work we're able to do. And otherwise it'll be, USGS or other, available information.
So the intent on the 11th is to be able to say of those two sites, either neither is viable, they're off the table, or we're actively considering this one based on the analysis, or still both of them are being actively considered.
Yeah. I mean, it will be some assessment of those two sites, one good, one not, or, like you say, somewhere around that.
So I mean, I guess the pressure's on to make sure that we don't repeat what you just referenced, Chad, of still talking about it and then 2 weeks later, because we got, you know what I mean? Like,
You have a pretty clear view at that point.
because that's going to draw some new attention.
Yeah.
For sure, especially if we're talking about them from a viability perspective on the 11th.
Mhm.
I think we want to Robin's point, start to notice those people that this is happening and they're going to show up.
think now it'll be Tim's call on this, but I think when we start going through the phase one and focus screening, we'll have some idea whether a site is off the list
Yeah.
completely at that point here.
Yeah,
I think when we're on that in that stage, we'd be able to reach out to neighbors. One thing I didn't mention, it's somewhat obvious that ultimately only one BLM site will go through the congressional process. So. Want to make sure everyone understands that, even though we're initially looking at 3, the intent all along was to narrow down to just a single site. Want to come on forward, Dan?
And the 15th is the date in August, right? Tuesday the 15th. For this group.
That would be the SWAC meeting.
Yeah, okay.
Hi, Daniel Baca. I just wanted to speak to Robin's question about the site near Powell Butte in regards to notifying people, because some of I think I've talked to you guys about before is proximity to people's wells and people's housing. And at the last meeting, you guys stated that 1,700 feet to the nearest residence is the Powell Butte site, is a third of a mile. I know there's a consideration for a 1 mile setback for people's wells. And I think that should be an implemented rule going forward, because especially in regards to this Powell Butte site, because we are putting the burden of our Deschutes County landfill on Crook County residents. That's, to me, seems like even if there's 1, 2, 3, but there's 8 out there, it doesn't matter. We're Deschutes County, we should take care of ourselves instead of placing this burden on Crook County. Also, the route that most of the trucks from the Redmond location would be taken would be through Cook County's property and turning there at the post office in Powell Butte, which is an extremely dangerous intersection. It's just, to me, that seems like at the least you should inform these people that this is going to be taking place in their backyard, especially since they're not even our county residents. Thank you.
I suppose there would be an option of cutting across that BLM road that connects 97 to right at the Bellevue site.
That, is it Mullen Road?
You know, the name of it.
Come from 97 to all the way across to Poway Highway.
Yeah.
That'd be a pretty substantial construction project.
Be upgraded in some way.
It's, make sure I'm understanding, Robin. So just north of the property. There,
Yeah, this road that goes across like.
yeah, that's basically a goat path.
Yeah.
There. So I mean, we're talking about a, major highway construction project to do that. I would expect that would be cost prohibitive for us to do. Have to go across BLM land, and I'm not sure how viable that might be. I mean, it's something to consider, but you're looking at a fairly lengthy construction project, several miles of road to build.
Kind of like Stooky Road, looks like a road.
Yeah, yeah, you can call it a road, yeah.
If we go a few months without a meeting, well, important progress is being made, could we get maybe a monthly one-page
That's a good
report?
idea. Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Jared, yeah. Great.
And I guess the field tour might be factored in there somewhere.
Yeah, when we start getting into this and we start looking at the sites, and if, certainly if one starts looking more viable, we can definitely reach out to you guys between meetings for a. But yeah, see if you guys want to get together for a site visit, we can certainly do that.
A couple of questions. Come on up.
My name is Harrison Ruffin, Deschutes County resident. The Highway 20 BLM site, does anyone know what the visibility impact is from Highway 20 at that site? Would the site be very visible from Highway 20?
We did talk about doing a scope of work for phase 2 does include visual. It's actually part of the site. Stand there. I don't want to say whether it's not going to be visible or it's going to be very visible. That analysis needs to be done. I mean, the density of juniper is pretty extensive in the area that does block view of any kind of excavation work. I mean, you can drive down Forest Ridge Frontage Road and not see those two large pit excavations.
I actually did not know they were there until I flew over them the other day. So I think it's just a matter of elevation, highway versus the site. And then I would ask the same question about the Powell Butte site.
Powell Butte site is a bit more of a challenge because it is very, very, very flat out there. There's the subdivision in Crook County,
Rosada.
Ranch.
And
Would have visibility of it. And Robin made a comment, so on the west end of Prairie Forest Ridges out there, you're looking down on that country. So, I mean, at some points out there, you can probably see the movie.
And I assume I think they're calling themselves Juniper Preserve now. Pronghorn is what it used to be called. Is that also pretty close to the Powell Butte site?
No, that one's it's a couple miles, probably 2.5 miles away.
Okay, so visibility from there would not be an issue.
Shouldn't be.
Good. And when would, in regards to the Powell Butte site, when would people around those sites get notified of, the possibility?
Like I said, I want to at least get through get through some level of preliminary assessment on those. I don't want to do what we did for Highway 97. We sent out notices before we had some of our own questions answered and had to retract that all less than 2 weeks later. I was not happy with having to do that, and I own that.
So no issues there. It's I think a legitimate, concern and should be addressed at some point, ideally when the site is more viable.
Absolutely.
Makes sense. And then the last question was just in the interest of kind of keeping Deschutes County tax dollars in the county. How many people do you expect this site to employ?
So we have a total of, I think, 24 FTEs. Well, this current year at not landfill. So So it'll be less because we won't have an intended scale operation at that facility because it's a limited use. So on a typical day, you'd have 3 to 4 heavy equipment operators and a supervisor on the site.
So 5 or 6 people, 15 people,
Yeah.
15, 5 or 6,
I would say 8 to 12. most
8 to
likely.
12.
Yeah,
Depending
since
on-
we'd be
Okay.
operating 7 days a week out there.
Annual salaries on these jobs, 50,000, 60,000 a year, something like that.
Probably with benefits, et cetera, at $100,000.
Okay, so we're talking around $1.5 million of Deschutes County tax money a year. It would be nice if those tax dollars stayed in the county, supported county residents. I feel like the Powell Butte site, likewise with the Roth East site, because of the Geo-Milliken Highway, we're more likely to have employees from Crook County manning those facilities.
I can tell you what we have. We have majority employees reside in Deschutes County. We do have one that resides in Jefferson County. At times we had employees from Klamath County.
This is at the Knott's landfill.
At landfill, the location of the job site doesn't have a lot of bearing on who applies for jobs with us.
Oh, interesting.
We're not
So,
gonna say we're not gonna- because we don't want Crook County attacking.
no, that's not at all what I'm saying. I'm just saying that proximity to, say, Prineville would, for commutes, and I don't know about you guys, but for me, when I take on jobs, the commute distance is definitely a factor. If I lived in Prineville and the site was very close by, I might apply for the job. As the site was, say, in the eastern end of the county, living in Bend might not be as advantageous as, coming from somewhere closer to that job site. And just, my interest is keeping the tax dollars here in the county to generate additional tax revenues when, they're spent. I like the idea of the employees owning property in Deschutes County, paying Deschutes County property taxes. Going to stores that are local in Deschutes County. And so my concern, but it sounds like people commute from Klamath Falls to work at the Knott landfill.
Not from Klamath Falls, Klamath County.
Okay, I don't know.
We have an employee right now that lives in Powell Butte. That works. I mean, when we go through the interview and hiring process, we're gonna hire the most qualified person.
Sure.
Truly, where they live has no bearing on it. That's their own personal decision if they want to work for Deschutes County.
Do you go out and solicit people for the jobs, or do people apply to you for the jobs?
The county, the Human Resources Department has a process to go through for announcing jobs. They're posted on a variety of internet sites. When there's a public postings, and you can sign up for job interest. If a particular job you're interested in comes up, they'll send you a notification for it.
Well, hopefully a lot of those people that work at that site would come from Deschutes County and the tax dollars would stay local, but obviously we want the best qualified people
Yeah,
regardless of where they live.
Vast majority live in Deschutes County. I think that's just the nature of the how the population is distributed in the region. Like I said, we would not disqualify somebody from another county if they're the most qualified employee.
Last thing to further on Steve Wright's comment about the wind up in Milliken County or Milliken Valley. Not only is it really windy there, the thermic activity is extreme. Just the other day on a fairly cool day flying over, I counted 26 thermals that all went above my height. I was at 8,600 feet and the dust columns easily went above me. One of those thermals kicking off in a landfill, it happens quite suddenly, quite violently. I'm sure you've seen dust devils before. They kind of come out of nowhere. That's going to carry the trash up, potentially to cloud base. And that's really hard to control. Once it gets up that high, it gets on the prevailing winds, which sometimes can be blowing 40, 50 knots or higher. That's going to distribute the trash over a pretty wide geographic area. And I would definitely want to keep the thermic activity in mind. There's all kinds of charts that you can look at that show, the thermic potential of any different area. Milliken Valley, the Christmas Valley, where that dry lake bed is because of the fine dust, it really marks the Milliken Valley is full of what they call moon dust. And this dust goes up and shows you, we'll drive out on Highway 20 and just see the columns going up to cloud base of the dust, and that will be trash if those thermals kick off at a land site landfill site, wherever it is, but the Milliken Valley is an exceptionally good place to fly because of the high activity that, the differentiation in air temperatures out there because of the ground surface. Horse Ridge, the valley down there, I don't know what that's called by the Badlands area. It's a hard crossing on a paraglider because there are very few thermals. Milliken Valley, you get up, no problem. You can cross the flats, no problem. You just stumble into them. But in Horse Valley, you need 4 or 5 guys flying with you, and maybe one guy can stumble into one, and there's only 1 or 2. And so it's a pretty big difference. But anyway, that's all. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate your effort.
So you've seen this slide before. Main point is that still we're looking at 29 for opening the new facility and having a decision on a site. We're looking at for next spring, and so that's kind of how we're geared up in doing our work going forward. So the last thing we have in the slides here are the boards, and I just wanted to have them in the slides for 2 reasons. One, so that they're part of this record and they're part of the presentation today. But just to let you know kind of what we're going through with these. And I don't know, Ryan, did you want to walk through these or I can?
Maybe if you just do a brief overview, we can talk in more detail.
Yeah, so the idea with the public workshop was just to be able to kind of talk one-on-one or, small group and actually look at the map, point on it and all that. It's always kind of fun to see things a little closer up and be able to talk about them. But so what they're really doing is they're walking us through the process that we've been through and then where we're going with this process. And so we start out with the exclusionary areas as identified here. One of the things you'll note on this is that the airport radius is not totally blued out in this case, mainly so you could see kind of where it is. We do have outlines on there, so you'll see that on the slide, but we kind of wanted to be able to have it a little bit more transparent so you could see kind of where it was and how it's hitting these different areas. And then based upon that, as you know, we had the areas where a site could possibly be, and the green areas here. And then, we did the broad site screening and had the 31 sites that then we were able to knock down through the focus screening down to the 12, I think it was 12 that we took into that process. And then the final slide being where we're at right now, which is the 2 sites that we're going into further investigation with now, and then also the 2 BLM sites that are still in play. And so that's what you'll see on these maps as they progress through the process we've been through here. And adjourn to the public meeting.
Just one quick comment on the question on visibility, just from going out there. I guess the Highway 20 BLM site, the further south you went in section 36, down the Stookie Road, the less visible, obviously, from Highway 20, but maybe the more visible from Forest Ridge. And on the other Powell Butte side, it looks like it's sort of a little bit of rolling. If you went past the first, at least a quarter mile in past the first little clump of rocks that you might be able to hide it somewhat. Brasada's 2 miles away from there at least.
Yeah, and one of the things we don't want to do when if that site comes up and gets through the process, we're not going to crowd the county line with where the landfill is positioned. I'm trying to remember how many acres that particular parcel is. I think it's over 300. So,
Yeah, it is.
We're looking at in theory 250 acres over the life of the site here. So we're going to try to avoid getting as close as we can to any of the neighbors or the county line there. So if we can push it to the west, but then that makes it more visible from the highway. And again, it is the land out there is much flatter than any of the other sites that we're looking at.
Yeah, it looked like there was a little ridge that you could get past that little
Yeah.
rock.
Yeah, it's not much. I mean, when Tim and I drove it, looking at it from the highway, you could see quite a ways back there to the east.
Where is it relative to Willard Road? Is it north?
Is that the east-west running road? I believe Willard Road is roughly the north boundary of it. Yeah.
So there'd be a real fine kind of rectangular area. Possibly. You're trying to avoid the county line and Hollow Butte Highway.
Well, I don't think a landfill has to be particularly rectangular in shape there. I mean, the design team would try to use features to help minimize the view impact, as well as maintaining functionality for the site.
Yeah, and on all these sites, we're also kind of looking at other means for visual isolation, so some strategic berming, plantings and things like that as well to help in that process.
And one thing to keep in mind, I brought this up a few times, at not landfill, our typical active area is about 10,000 square feet. So distance plays a role in just exactly how visible that 10,000 square foot area might be. Now, granted, as a landfill develops, you'll have some landforms out there that may not have vegetation on them for a few years as well. But the active area is very limited on a site. Yeah. Any other questions or discussion?
Yeah, I've had-
Yeah, Jared.
I was zooming some of these meetings and I was having trouble identifying the different sites because sometimes they had a number, sometimes now it seems like there's names, but I look back here on those boards and I don't see the names associated with the final.
I don't know how many eyes have looked at them. We should have had you look at them.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
All the sites, which one is closest to the waste centric?
So the question was, of all the sites, which is closest to the waste centroid? I would say the BLM Powell Butte site, the BLM Highway 20 site, and Moon Pit are probably pretty darn close in distance. We generally assume not landfill is roughly the waste centroid. So all three of those sites they got to be within a mile or two of each other. Yeah.
It's about 3-4 miles from.
Okay. It's close enough that there's not really an economic difference.
I would say no, but this is at very early stage.
Which-
As far as economic distance, as far as transportation, but they all have their implications for road and access construction like that.
Which site is the furthest from the waste centric?
That would be Roth East.
Okay.
But again, it's the criteria was ideally no more than 30 miles out, and that's within that radius.
I feel like that's a large part of the environmental impact of the landfill, or am I correct in that, or?
I mean, as far as like vehicle emissions and things like that.
Total emissions of the landfill, how do they change by the distance from the waste centric? Is that a?
Well, I mean, a ton of waste is going to generate so much emission. So whether it's placed at not landfill or Roth East or Moon Pit, it's the same amount of emissions. If you're talking about vehicle emissions, yeah, it's obvious that the further out you go, the more vehicle emissions you would have.
So besides the actual emissions off the waste itself, the only real variable is the transport emissions?
Yes.
Okay, so then the further the site, that's could be a fairly significant environmental factor, or?
I'm not sure if I would characterize it fairly significant. Certainly when we were doing the solid waste management plan, it was a fairly significant when we were talking about transporting waste within Deschutes County versus taking it to the Columbia Gorge. That was there was a substantial difference there in vehicle miles there. If you're talking about 24 miles versus 30 miles, well, yeah, you got a 6 mile difference there. How that actually factors in. I'm not sure how much of a weight that would carry in the ultimate analysis with everything else that you're looking at.
Is there any factor, any consideration given to the load placed on the transportation infrastructure? It's not developing new roads and all for the specific site, but just what the impact is on the infrastructure. For instance, 10 extra miles on Highway 20 for the 200 trucks a day or whatever the number is. That's just a hypothetical number. And how that would affect the roads and the traffic, and whether that would create a need for, say, improvements along those byways.
Yeah, that's an ODOT call. and I'm not sure how to answer that.
It is an ODOT call and actually from, given the amount of additional traffic versus what's on these highways now, it's not that much more. And these highways are, they are, especially the state routes, like Highway 20, that is built for this type of equipment. Where it really comes into play is on the arterials and the local roads. And so that's why that comes into play more. And actually within our criteria, we evaluated more based upon that, because that's the impact both on the roadway itself, as well as typically more impact on the haul routes and impacts to neighbors who are on the haul routes. And so that's why we definitely gave more of a consideration for it for the local roads as opposed to the state route. The state route being significant from the standpoint of the distance you're going and, the haul route distance.
Any improvements on the state routes would be borne by, or cost-wise would be borne by Deschutes County or by the state?
So at our transfer station down by Lapine, we did do some improvements to Highway 97 for safe access. I'll use Rothy's as an example. If the county were to select that site and do improvements, I would expect some kind of a turn pockets and things like that off of Highway 20 would be something we would gladly do to make safe egress out of the site, and we'd coordinate that with ODOT. That was kind of the same process we did for the Southwest Transfer Station about 15 years ago.
And so for the turnouts, say on Highway 20, would the state pay for the costs on Highway 20 or would Deschutes County?
Oh, Deschutes County, we paid for the improvements we did on Highway 97 for the transfer station.
And using the same site, the Rothy's site, if you were to use Ford Road to access that, all of that improvement would be borne by Deschutes County.
Correct. I'm not sure how viable Roth or Ford Road would be for that, but yeah, that'll be part of that analysis.
Just
Yeah.
using that as.
Any improvements related to the landfill itself will be borne by the county, by the waste generators in Deschutes County. I just want to remind this is not a tax supported operation. We are an enterprise fund, and if you generate waste and bring it to our facilities, that's how the bills are paid.
Just trying to minimize the cost for
Sure.
the user and the environment. Thank you.
One comment.
Steve Wright, Deschutes County resident as well. Relating to the distance within 30 miles and, this distance versus that distance is either a question or a statement. And you're going to have to, or are you going to take into consideration that grade, that 2 mile long grade? It's the Horse Ridge Summit grade. I believe it's around 6% and it's 2 miles going up. So I've seen trucks go up there, they slow way down because, it's just really steep. So, it might be 30 miles, but that comes with an extra, bonus.
The bonus is going down.
Yeah, it's a negative. It's not a bonus, but it's, you either add mileage on, you're gonna add mileage onto it or add stress on the trucks or take away gas on the vehicles. And, during the winter time, they do throw lots of cinders on that road because they got the tall walls on each side and it's shaded a lot of times and you get ice in there. So it's not a pleasant area to travel. So I just wanted to throw that out, the grade, to consider that for Rothy's. So Moon Pit's a lot easier to get to. In fact, the other 2 BLM sites are easier to get to as far as being on the level. Thank you.
Looking at the map, it looks like Moon Pit's about 5 miles further than BLM Highway 27.
I was just kind of going by
Yeah.
dead reckoning.
That's pretty just rough.
Any other comments, questions, discussion? We can adjourn and kind of go to an open forum.
We should thank you for your leadership.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Thank you. Meeting adjourned.
June 30th is the big day.
June 30th is the big day.
Good luck.
Thanks. How's that counter going there?
was that?
You checking the counter? Is that what-
Yeah, actually, at Christmas, the kids snuck a countdown thing onto my phone when I was.